Perfect.
Okay.
All right, Ed. So, by the way, I got you our new T-shirts.
Okay, they're not purple.
Not purple. They're actually made so that people won't be afraid to wear them. So, so you've been involved with calendars quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
Since when?
Since 1993.
Okay. So, when you first started, talk to me about what was there, what were your challenges, what was happening in the industry, type of thing, and so on.
So, 1993, I was in IT. I wasn't a vendor. And I was at a typical mid-sized company growing, and we were using file sharing-based email. And we had not had any sort of historical legacy mainframe systems. We were never on profs or anything like that. And we just had grown up this email culture. And as we were growing as a company, you couldn't just go down the hall and say, let's have a meeting. It had to start getting a formalized structure from when it was 200 people in one building to 1,000 people across the campus.
So were people using electronic calendars then?
Not really. There was a lot of file effects and whatever daytimers and the like, and on paper, yeah, and email to try to coordinate calendars, but that was pretty much it in that company. Some of the very earliest PDAs were just starting to come out. Mm-hmm. So the HP 95LX was like one of the first handheld flip-up devices that had CC Mail built into it. Some people had Palm Pilots or Palms, that they were just Palms at the time, and we're starting to use that. But really, for the most part, electronic calendaring wasn't in the environment. It wasn't in the workplace, unless you had been in a big company that had IBM Profs and a mainframe. That was kind of the only way. So those people were used to, my calendar's just on my system. That wasn't a very good calendar, but it was there in a closed environment. You had it. We didn't have any of that.
Okay.
And none of the file sharing vendors had any kind of calendaring service as part of their email systems. There was nothing with CC Mail. There was nothing with Microsoft Mail. WordPerfect Office eventually added calendar, but it wasn't initially there either. So the industry in the early 90s was just starting to recognize calendaring. Lotus acquired a company called Threads in the UK, and they made Organizer. And so Lotus had this PIM product, Lotus Organizer, and then they undertook in 93 the engineering to make Lotus Organizer a group calendar product.
Okay.
And as a CC Mail customer with these kind of problems in our business, we were extremely interested in what Lotus was going to do there. Microsoft also started doing with Schedule Plus, which was some add-in to Microsoft Mail. Mm-hmm. And, so it sort of got born in the distributed environment 93 timeframe.
So why do you think the calendar was merged with mail?
I think transport was really the main reason. Everybody already got email in the organization, so it was the only system in most companies that touched everyone. And if I could piggyback on that to do some other business workflow, especially something as horizontal as calendaring, I think that was probably the logic. And in fact, the early versions of Lotus Organizer didn't do anything in the mail system. Your invites and all of that stuff were separate. When you launched Lotus Organizer, you saw them, but they were culled out of your inbox by the Organizer program, essentially as a hack, right? It would go into your inbox and look for keywords and pull those over into Lotus Organizer, but you did all your workflow and calendaring stuff in the calendar then. It wasn't like you were in your inbox and saw an invitation.
Okay. I just want to see if everything's working all right. Actually, this is good, by the way. I didn't even know that the early versions of calendar were actually separated from the mail.
It just used mail as transport. That was all it was, and it was.
And also, I guess it's a good distribution channel, right? Like
yeah.
You basically say, well, if I want to get calendar in the hands of a lot of people, at the end of the day, put it with the mail.
Right. Well, and it had a directory already,
yeah,
so
that's true.
that, But the individual calendars were individual files, They weren't in any kind of shared database. They had to go on an H drive on the network or whatever.
So local.
But it was a single file. It was my .org or .or2 or whatever, and I could copy that to my local drive if I was working on it at home or on a laptop or whatever. Not that everybody had laptops at that time either, but not many at all did.
Yeah.
But it was very single user centric and very kludgy. It just was, but it somehow worked.
Okay, and then so then, what was the next logical step from there?
So then, in kind of the mid '90s, is when the client-server messaging era sort of started to take off, with Lotus with Notes v4 and Microsoft with Exchange.
Right.
And Exchange 96 originally just used a Microsoft Mail client, but then they introduced Outlook in 97. Yeah, Outlook 97. And that was a combined mail and calendar client. And Lotus introduced Notes 4.5 with an integrated calendar that we had based loosely on the features of Organizer in 1997. We also made Organizer work on top of Notes.
What were customers saying? Like back then,
calendaring became a requirement, driven by IT.
By IT?
Yeah. Just as this is another service we want to provide as part of our enterprise communications infrastructure. Now that we see the technology is available, we want it. We want it in this environment. Okay. And a lot of companies that had never gone through a file sharing based email system were still on mainframes. We're on Profs. We're on DEC All-in-One. All these other sort of prior generation mail systems that had calendaring. So they were like, well, if I'm going to move to client server, it's got to have a calendar. So that was really the impetus for us to get that into the product in the 96, 97 timeframe.
Okay. And then so that calendar that you started to put in there, when did it become, when did the switch happen from saying, okay, it's my calendar, versus I want to start sharing it with other people? And what was the reason people started to want a calendar sharing?
I think that some corporate cultures really drove the idea that I want everybody to be able to see what my calendar is, my department. I want to be able to choose people to know where I'm at. The mechanisms weren't easy to distribute that information any other way. Most of the email systems didn't even have an out-of-the-office kind of a function at that point, not an effective one. So, putting my calendar online was an easy way to tell my work group or my department or my building or whatever where I was. And even the earliest versions of Notes and Outlook had some level of privacy controls or whatever, that I could just publish free time, or I could just publish my calendar or whatever. And I think that the organizational need was just to be able to know where people were as companies that were distributed across multiple sites started to work together more using other current generation collaborative tools.
Okay. And did that need then evolve into something else after that, or was it really, I want to know what people in my organization are doing?
I think the evolution from there was, how do I schedule conference rooms? How do I think about really truly doing meetings this way and not just personal diary info? How do I sync that to something that's a local device of some kind, or at least have access to it at home? So the usage patterns did definitely change from the initial, sort of our 4.5 release to now. The use of calendaring has become part and parcel of every deployment. For a while there, when we introduced it, about half customers said, we're not going to use that. We're just using it as an email system, or we have apps. But calendaring now in 2010, I think pretty much every Notes customer uses the calendar. I'm sure that Outlook users would say exactly the same thing.
If you forward to now, or the present, or maybe in the future, I don't know, do you see that the calendar can exist by itself? Or does it need to be with the email system?
I think the calendar a few years ago probably hit an inflection point where it was distinct from the email. There's some things like directory lookup or whatever that it needs to sort of rely on the same infrastructure, but in some ways my calendar has its extensions now, instead of to email, to online meetings right? If I'm going to have an online meeting, I have a single click link to initiate that and start the meeting and whatever. Presence and awareness, so my instant messaging kind of environment, so I can see if the people I invited to this meeting are online right now and if they're going to show up to the meeting, whether they accept it or not. I can have a side chat going. I can whiteboard with them. I can do voice over IP. So I think it's more that the calendar's actually become a center of work as opposed to it being an adjunct to the mail system. What it hasn't done yet, and what we and probably other companies look at pretty extensively in research, is how do I use the calendar to more effectively manage my day as opposed to my day being managed by the calendar. And I think that's still one of the biggest challenges with email and calendar and all the collaborative tools, is how do I, as the individual knowledge worker, decide what I want to do every day and not just come in and say, here's the things that are going to happen today based on my calendar.
So what do you see happening there? Like, what tools can be built, or what can happen there?
So, our research team likes to talk about social analytics. They like to talk about looking at your environment for cues as to what's most important. So one of the things we're working on under the banner of Project Vulcan is the notion that if I have a 30-minute block of time that isn't in a scheduled meeting, the system's going to bubble up for me 5 or 6 tasks, activities, I don't know what right word to put on it, informational bullets, things that I should do in this 20 minutes because there are things going on in the environment right now. They're time-sensitive things like an expense report approval. How do I want to best use my spare time outside of meetings? And then when I am in a meeting, have I invited the right people based on the subject matter of the meeting? Are we doing the right document sharing? Do we have the minutes being captured in an activity? So it needs to become more of a focusing effort on the work product. And I guess I've kind of been beating this drum for years, and the technology's now going in this direction of, I don't want to be reactive all day. I don't want to just sit there and say, oh, what's next on my calendar? Oh, now I have to start thinking about this. I want to be going all day with, here's what I'm thinking about, here's what I'm trying to accomplish today, and have the tools help me get those done.
Interesting. And how do you see, or is there a fit? Like, what's your vision about, there's all these buzz about location-based services, and it's telling you where you are at this moment, and so on. Like, is there a tie-in with the calendar, in your opinion, on this, and what's your...
Yeah. So, we've already taken one step in that direction by linking presence awareness with calendar.
Yeah.
So my calendar already knows if I've got a scheduled meeting to put me on that status automatically as the clock strikes 10:30. And it's going to grab from my presence awareness what location I've defined that I'm at. And in the Lotus Same Time world, we have that set up. It can even be IP address based, that when you log in, say here from an IBM office, that it already knows where you are and it's identifying that, and it knows what the best way to contact you is going to be based on your system profiles. So we're kind of halfway there. The rest of the way there that I think a lot of people are trying to solve is who's around me that might be useful for ad hoc collaboration. Maybe I'm already having a meeting about Project Purple, and there's a Project Purple staff member who's in the same facility I'm in right now, but they weren't on the invite list for this meeting, but maybe they have something to contribute. We kind of go sort of grab them from their location awareness and pull them into a work product. Or the more random, I'm in an airport and one of my business partners is in the same airport, and boy, we both have an hour delay on our flight. Shouldn't we go grab a beer?